My name is Victor Fuhrman. Some call me the Voice. I've always been fascinated with human nature, spirituality, science, and the crossroads at which they meet. Join me now and we will explore these topics and so much more with fascinating guests, authors, and experts who will guide us to Destination Unlimited. As a child growing up in the 1950s, I had a number of experiences that I could not explain. I would wake up in the middle of the night, have a sense of traveling into the sky, and being in the presence of what I thought were special teachers. When this night school was over, I remember being back in my room, looking out the window, and seeing triangular objects in the sky which quickly vanished. When I shared these experiences with my parents and others, I was told that I was imagining them and had an overactive imagination. But a series of events later in life confirmed what I knew to be the truth. I was a contactee, and my teachers were not of this world. In 1966, I was fortunate to have been given a copy of John G. Fuller's book, The Interrupted Journey. It was the story of Betty and Barney Hill, whose 1961 experience was far more frightening and unwelcomed than my own. In 2007, I read Captured, the Betty and Barney Hill UFO Experience, the true story of the world's first documented alien abduction. The book was co-authored by the late physicist and ufologist Stanton Friedman and Betty Hill's niece, Kathleen Marden. It provided a complete picture of the Hills abduction. We are once again grateful to have with us on Destination Unlimited this week, Kathleen Marden. Kathleen Marden is a leading ufologist who since 1990 has been researching the perplexing nature of UFOs and the non-human entities associated with highly advanced aerial vehicles, not through the work of others, but via her own groundbreaking research, investigation, and experimentation. She's a certified practitioner of regression hypnosis and the quantum healing hypnosis technique. She's worked on 3 comprehensive studies on nearly 5,000 experiencers, 2 of which she initiated and saw to the end, and has 5 published books. She's been a frequent guest and commentator on the Discovery, History, National Geographic, Destination America, Science, and Travel channels, and on several documentaries. Most recently, her work has been featured on Ancient Aliens and several Travel Channel shows. Kathleen has lectured at conferences across the United States and in Canada, Mexico, and Brazil, and the United Kingdom. Her website is kathleen-marden.com, and she joins us this week to discuss her path and the 60th anniversary edition of Captured, the Betty and Barney Hill UFO Experience. Please join me in welcoming back to Destination Unlimited, Kathleen Marden. Welcome, Kathleen.
Thank you. It's great to be with you again, Victor.
And wonderful to share this 60th anniversary. You know, it's mind-boggling to think that this year will mark the 60th anniversary of your aunt and uncle's abduction. That was September 1961. Please tell us about Betty and Barney Hill before that fateful night.
Well, it certainly is mind-boggling that all of those years have passed since I was a 13-year-old overhearing my mother speaking with Betty on the phone as Betty was expressing concern over what had happened to them the previous night on their trip home from a vacation. But what were they like before that fateful night? Betty and Barney were just delightful people. There's nothing unfavorable that I could say about either of them. They were kind. They were caring. They cared about other people in their community, in their state. Betty was a social worker for the state of New Hampshire who worked in child welfare and adoption. Barney worked for the post office and had served honorably in the Army during World War II. And he and Betty were both very actively involved in the civil rights movement. They were involved in literacy programs for individuals who wanted to vote. Their heart was in their community and making the state of New Hampshire a better place for its less fortunate citizens. And that's the way they were with our family as well, with all of the children. I look back upon them, and I always admired Betty as I remembered back to the time when she had gone back to college in the 50s and how she would come to visit the farm. That my grandparents' farm, I lived across the street from it, and she was taking an entomology class, and she was running around with a butterfly net, catching bugs to put onto her project, her class project for that class, and how proud we all were when she graduated from the university with her degree in social work. In fact, I ended up following her footsteps and earned my first degree in social work as well. And I just remember how vivacious she was and how caring. I had a special bond with Betty, and I think that happened because she lived right across the street from my parents when I was born, and she would hold me and exercise me, saying that it was going to increase my level of intelligence. She had learned that from the Philadelphia Institute with the children they worked with there, and how I always thought of her, in a sense, as a second mother, because whenever my mother and I were not getting along, I could go to Betty, and she would be very understanding and help to solve the problem. Barney, too, was very interested in the children in the family and seeing us do well. We would always show him our report cards and speak with him about our achievements and play checkers or chess or other games with him. So he paid attention to the children in the family, and we appreciated that very much, that, he wasn't there just to talk with the adults and ignore the children. He made us feel that we were an important part of the family as well.
So they were a wonderful, loving couple, family people, community active, and then that fateful night. When did you first learn about what happened, and how did your family react?
I learned about it the following day. It was actually the early morning hours after midnight on September 20th, 1961, that the abduction actually occurred. And that afternoon, Betty was on the phone with my mother when I returned home from school, and she was expressing worry and concern that the craft had come so close to her and to Barney that she feared they might have been contaminated. She was the one who sat in the car as the craft hovered 200 feet overhead. It was Barney who opened the door and stepped out with his binoculars and then stepped away, and that is when the craft shifted into an adjacent field, and he followed it into the field, still attempting to identify it, because he knew that it was impossible that flying saucers could exist. And he wasn't able to identify that. And I think that's what was so deeply troubling to him. But what was worried Betty is that craft came within 100 feet of Barney. And could he have received some kind of radiation poisoning as a result of being in close contact with that craft before he ran to the car, screaming to Betty that they had to get out of there? Then there were the perplexing buzzing sounds, code-like buzzing sounds, striking the trunk of their vehicle that caused the vehicle to vibrate and for a tingling sensation to pass through their bodies. What was that? They'd never had that experience before. Did that sensation they felt signal that they had been harmed by some sort of ray? And those were the perplexing questions that Betty wanted my mother to ask our neighbor, who was a physicist. So my mother asked him. She was back on the phone with Betty. It was that very afternoon that I heard for the first time that my own mother had a sighting with another aunt back in 1957 or 58 when they were on their weekly grocery shopping trip on Friday evening. And the craft was like a huge mothership, more cigar-shaped than anything. And there were smaller craft flying around it, coming out or entering. My mother wasn't sure. They ran to a nearby home, and the people who lived in that home also witnessed that craft. So it isn't anything that my mother told us about. There was not a long-term family interest in this topic. But within 2 days, my family traveled to Betty's and Barney's house, and I heard the story firsthand. I saw the watch that Betty had attempted to fix, to wind, and that watch never ran again, and nor did Barney's. They were wind-up watches. And I saw those shiny spots on the trunk of the car, where in the exact location where they heard those buzzing sounds striking, that now had a magnetic field that caused a compass needle to rotate.
And did you see Betty's famous dress that day?
I did not see her dress that day. When she took it off, she noticed all of the tears in it. The tears at the top of the zipper. The hem was down. The lining was torn from waist to hemline. She had no idea how this happened during an enjoyable afternoon and evening driving home from vacation. She had put the dress in her closet knowing that it had to be repaired, and she took it out at some later point. So I didn't know about that immediately. I did know that the tops of Barney's best dress shoes were so deeply scraped that he had to purchase new shoes. He was a meticulous dresser. There was no explanation for how that had occurred. I did know that the binocular strap, the leather strap that he had around his neck, was severed. But he was in such a fearful state when he pulled those binoculars from his eyes. He could have done it so violently that it broke the strap. That was my understanding as a 13-year-old.
So the initial contact they had, seeing the craft, led to curiosity. That curiosity soon turned to fear, having a series of nightmares.
Betty had 5 dreams. They began 10 days after the experience occurred, and they told of things that she had conscious recall for. But sandwiched in between that conscious recall was being stopped on the highway by entities that looked very human. They had a Southern European appearance. They had black hair. They had all the human features that we have. They were dressed in blue cadet uniforms with cadet hats, and they spoke English with an accent. And this was not anything like the entities that Betty and Barney saw in the road and on that craft. So what this early morning dream sequence is a combination of fantasy and reality. She was in that mild hypnotic state that you have just before you wake up in the morning, where you can dream about things that did happen and are real, but always sandwiched in is some fantasy material too, something that is different than actually what did happen, but it's our mind's way of working through any kind of anxiety that we might be experiencing. So Betty had those dreams. She worked through that anxiety. She wasn't the one who stood in that field and looked up at those non-human entities, felt that he was going to be captured, and went screaming back to the car to Betty. Barney did not process that information well. In fact, it led to post-traumatic stress disorder. That's what we call it today. Back then, they would call it shell shock or conversion hysteria, when you would develop physiological symptoms that were psychogenically induced. So, yes, that is what happened when Betty called my mother, and immediately Betty's and Barney's concerns about this.
So what caused them to seek out hypnotic regression?
Well, immediately we knew that Betty said that Barney had developed a mental block. He remembered that those figures were dressed in black, shiny uniforms of some kind, but he could not remember their faces. And in the early interview that he did, the interrogation by astronomer Walter Webb for the National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena, Barney said that these figures were somehow not human. Those were his terms. But he did not remember their faces, although he did remember an expression on one face. So this was immediate. My father sat quietly with Barney on that afternoon when we visited, only 2 days after this occurred. And my father told me that Barney was very clear about what he saw, and that he had observed non-human entities, but there was this missing time. They arrived home more than 2 hours later than they had anticipated, and they had all of these questions about their clothing and the watches and the spots on the trunk of the car. And my father said to Barney, well, maybe you want to see a hypnotist who can help you remember. Now, that's not the way the story has been told, because when the first time this story was written, not much was known about the case. And for the interrupted journey, we were told that it was Robert Homan and C.D. Jackson in November of that year. John Fuller's publisher forced him to make the story more interesting, to put more suspense into it, to add a different type of story that they thought would be important. John was an investigative journalist. Stanton and I were not. We are researchers. Researchers look at things differently. We actually did a case study. So that's the difference. But Barney looked for a psychiatrist who could advise him on what he should do. And he was referred finally to Dr. Benjamin Simon in Boston, Massachusetts. Dr. Simon had developed a special technique that he used during World War II to assist veterans who were returning from the war with shell shock, incapable of returning to their families. Dr. Simon set up the psychiatric unit at Mason General Hospital on Long Island in New York. And he had great success in helping these soldiers to overcome the physiological symptoms that they were having that were psychologically induced. So at the end of the movie, Let There Be Light, the movie that was made about his extraordinary work, you saw these veterans who came in not being able to walk, and now they were running the bases in a ball game. You saw veterans who were not able to see, who were blinded. who were now able to see and running the bases. He developed a special technique that caused him to get to the real story much better than any other psychiatrist could. And he was the perfect person for Barney to go to, even though Dr. Simon did not believe that UFOs could possibly be real, just like Barney.
Absolutely.
In fact.
Absolutely. We're going to talk more about those regression sessions in the next segment. My guest, Kathleen Marden, we're talking about the 60th anniversary edition of Captured, the Betty and Barney Hill UFO Experience. Kathleen, please tell our listeners where they can get the book and find out more about you and this amazing work that you do.
You can purchase an autographed copy of any of my 5 books and one of Stanton's books on my website at Kathleen, Kathleen -Marden, MARDEN.com. The books are also available in various formats. Online through a number of bookstores, including Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and you can just do a search and you'll see where they are. I even read, when I did a search, that they're going to be sold at Walmart and Target.
Well, you know what? The story has to get out to more and more people, and I think it's really important. And I think it's wonderful that 60 years on that this is happening. My guest is Kathleen Marden. We'll be back with more after these words on the OMTimes Radio Network.
The best of the holistic, spiritual, and conscious world. OMTimes Radio. IOM-FM. OMTimes Magazine is one of the leading online content providers of positivity, wellness, and personal empowerment. A philanthropic organization, their net proceeds are funneled to support worldwide charity initiatives via Humanity Healing International. Through their commitment to creating community and providing conscious content, they aspire to uplift humanity on a global scale. OMTimes, co-creating a more conscious lifestyle.
Hello, I'm Sandy Sedgbeer, host of OMTimes Magazine's flagship radio show, What is Going On? My passion is sifting through information, research, and innovations from new thought teachers, speakers, and researchers pushing back the boundaries of what we know about life, energy, metaphysics, and the universe. I love shifting perceptions about who we are, why we're here, and how quickly impossible becomes normal when we open our minds, expand our awareness, and accept that the only limits that exist are those we place upon ourselves. So if you're the kind of forward-thinking, eager investigator of what lies beyond the current reality that most perceive, why not make a date to come play with me in the field of possibilities at 4 p.m. Pacific Time, 7 p.m. Eastern Time every Thursday, and together we can discover what's really going on.
Back on Destination Unlimited, my guest this week, Kathleen Marden. We're talking about the 60th anniversary edition of Captured, the Betty and Barney Hill UFO Experience. So in the last segment, you were talking about the hypnotic regression sessions. What came through during those sessions?
Well, let me state first that Dr. Simon took Betty and Barney separately and reinstated amnesia at the end of each session. He did this for 2 reasons. The first was so that they could not contaminate one another's information. They couldn't remember it. And the second reason was that both Betty and Barney had huge emotional outbursts. They were terrified at certain points during their hypnosis sessions, and he, as a professional psychiatrist, realized that it would be better if they processed this slowly with him. Later on, if they were to remember all of that immediately, it could increase their level of anxiety.
Mm.
And so what happened? Well, Betty and Barney, after they heard that series of buzzing sounds, found themselves on a dirt road. There were tall trees all around. There was a red-orange glow up ahead. And then their headlights beamed on entities that were standing in the road. Barney said to Betty, I think it's them. I think it's the ones I saw when I was standing in the field. Betty became terrified. She had never been so terrified in her entire life. She attempted to run into the woods to hide, but she was intercepted. Barney knew that he might be harmed unless he was cooperative. So he just opened the door and stepped out, and he said that he felt like he was floating. He could not feel the hands supporting him, but he knew that he must be somehow supported, and that only the toes of his shoes were bumping along the rocks as he was being taken down through a path in the woods. Betty was intercepted, and she remembered walking through the woods. She had woken up again. They had, when they took her, they had pointed something at her that caused her to lose consciousness. But she woke up when Barney was already on the craft, and she had woken up and was terrified. She was being escorted by an entity on each side, and she fought for her life. Because in that time frame, we didn't know that there were UFO abductions. We didn't know that there were non-human entities coming to take humans on board the craft. This had not been reported anywhere in the United States. And so Betty didn't know if she was going to ever see her family again. She didn't know what was going to happen, even though these entities continued to reassure her that she would not be harmed. They needed only to do a few simple tests, and then she would be released. Betty didn't trust them at that point, and she fought for her life, tearing her dress. And finally, they regained control of her and took her onto the craft. She and Barney were taken to separate rooms. They underwent physical examinations of kind of an odd sort. They were very interested in their skeletal structure, in their muscular structure, in their joints, their hands, their feet. They looked them all over. And with Betty, they ended up putting her on a table and did something to her. That it was a procedure that wasn't even being used in this country in that time frame. It would have been impossible for Betty to know about this. But what we think it reminds us of is an amniocentesis that doctors do, where they insert a needle into the navel in order to draw amniotic fluid out of the sac on a pregnant woman. Now, certainly Betty was not pregnant. She was 42 years old. And we believe that they may have taken ova, or they may have simply been doing some kind of high-tech examination on the organs in her body. But it caused Betty a great deal of distress. Dr. Simon had to end the session early, and she was relieved of the pain and reassured by the one she called the leader, who we now know is the escort, that experiencers see time and time again. The person who makes them feel comfortable. They have a relationship with this person when they're taken to craft, or even when they're visited in their own homes. And for Barney, he underwent the same kind of procedure. Betty went first, then the examiner went to the room that Barney was in, where he was waiting under supervision by a smaller group of assistants, and a taller one. And these were something like gray type beings. You think of the smaller ones more like grays, the taller ones more like Asians, with a bit of variation in color, eyes larger, slit from a mouth, but Betty, and no visible ear but more of an Asian look, more humanoid. Well, humanoid simply means that you have a head, a torso, 2 arms, and 2 legs. So, but more, I should say, a little more human than the shorter humanoid beings.
Please tell us about the star map that Betty drew and how amazing it turned out to be.
Well, Betty had put her dress back on, and the leader was in the room. She now trusted him, and so she said to him, I know you're not from around these parts. Where is your home base? And he responded, this is telepathic communication, he responded by producing a 3-dimensional star map. It was almost like she was looking out a window, or like it was a kind of a 3-dimensional map or hologram that has not been established 100%. And on that map, as she looked at it, she could see 2 stars that were about the size of nickels in the foreground, and they were connected by 5 solid lines. There was another star over to the right of the top one in the foreground, connected by 2 lines, and then there were 3 other stars that were connected by 2 or 3 lines. Then there were dotted lines. The dotted lines represented expeditions. These were places that they had not really been to yet or had planned to go to. So this was sort of a star chart of where they were exploring in their local galactic neighborhood. Later we learned out 54 light years.
And she drew this map, and at the time, we didn't have the ability to find these stars. Astronomy didn't have the tools until much, much later.
Yes, absolutely. It was amazing. It's all in the book, but it was an incredible undertaking by a brilliant woman from Ohio, Marjorie Fish, who worked for several years attempting to identify the stars on Betty's star map that she drew as the result of a hypnotic suggestion by Dr. Benjamin Simon. And it was published in the first book. You will see the star map and the stars being identified in the books that Stanton, Friedman, and I wrote on this. So what Marjorie Fish did is that she would go to the university. Didn't have the internet yet then. We didn't even have photocopying machines, so that she could photocopy the books. She had to sit and hand copy all of the distance data and all of the characteristics of the stars out 54 light years from our sun in all directions. And then she was using monofilament line and beads of various sizes and colors that in a metallic or wood frame that she had constructed, and doing the math to place each one of these stars in their proper location. And still, after several years, she didn't have a match until a new Gliese catalog was released. And lo and behold, she took that information back, rearranged some stars, put 3 stars in that hadn't been on the original map, on Betty's map, but not on anything she could find. And she had a match for Betty's map. So that was an extraordinary event. It was carried to the scientific community by Stanton Friedman, who assisted Marjorie in asking scientists to vet her work. They discovered that it was accurate. It was covered in Astronomy magazine and in a special small magazine put out especially about the star map as well. And there was a great deal of interest in this by astronomers and also by debunkers who would say that, well, you could simply throw marbles into a sand pile, and you would be able to find a match for that constellation. Well, maybe that could happen, but that's not what happened. That's not what was on Betty's map, because all of those stars had special characteristics.
Absolutely.
All of the stars on Betty's map were connected by solid lines, are sun-like stars.
Absolutely.
And all of the sun-like stars in that volume of space are on Betty's map.
Amazing.
That was extraordinary.
Amazing. Your aunt and uncle shunned publicity. They were private people. How did their story become mainstream?
Betty and Barney did their best to keep this story within their family, their close friends, and UFO investigators and scientists and people in the military. But one of Betty's friends spoke to a friend of hers who happened to be a newspaper reporter for the Boston Traveler. And he phoned Betty and Barney, and he named her in a letter that he wrote to Betty and Barney, saying that she had talked to him about their experience and how remarkable it was and how he wanted to talk with them. And he said that if you will talk with me, I want to reassure you that I have no intention of publicizing this in any way. It's only for my own information. And Betty and Barney still said, no, we will not meet with you. We want this to be kept private. We would lose our jobs. It will destroy our lives. Don't publish this, and we will not talk to you about it. Well, he went out and he talked to many people. He talked to Pease Air Force Base. In fact, he found at least a dozen witnesses to the craft that night. So that is new news. And so something came out of it for this writer's benefit, but certainly not for Betty and Barney, because Barney and Betty were very active in politics in the state of New Hampshire. They had campaigned by that time for Lyndon Johnson's presidency. Barney was a delegate for the state of New Hampshire. He had also been elected to the National Civil Rights Commission, and he was a representative for the state of New Hampshire to the U.S. Civil Rights Commission. They held important positions in the state. Barney had actually received an award from Sergeant Shriver for the work that he had done on a volunteer basis in New Hampshire through the Office of Economic Opportunity. So they had everything to lose and nothing to gain from having this kooky story go forward. But it did.
Yeah.
And it was extremely distressing to both Betty and Barney.
Absolutely.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, in fact, they came down to meet with the family. We gathered in my grandparents' home and discussed what had happened and how we should approach it as a family.
Did Betty or Barney have any sightings or experiences after the abduction?
Yes, they did. They did have sightings. Barney died young. He was only 46 years old from a massive cerebral hemorrhage. He had had a couple of close encounters while driving with Betty, and Betty had several encounters after that, and in fact I believe that she probably had additional visitations as well.
My guest is Kathleen Marden. We're talking about Captured, the Betty and Barney Hill UFO Experience, the 60th anniversary edition. We'll be back with more after these words on the OMTimes Radio Network.
Ascending Hearts is no ordinary dating site. but a spiritual dating site with a purpose, to link you with your soulmate. We engineer the serendipity so you can trust that you will attune with someone that has the same matching vibration as you. Ascending Hearts, the conscious dating site for the spiritually aware. Try Ascending Hearts for free. AscendingHearts.com.
Imagine yourself being transported to India, to the banks of the Ganga and an ashram in Rishikesh. Visualize that you are welcome to satsang with an American sannyasi who shares the wisdom of her guru. Your visualization has manifested. Join Sattvi Bhagawati Saraswati for inspiration and transformation every Thursday at 11 a.m. Eastern on OMTimes Radio.
Hi, we're the Goo Goo Dolls. We're fortunate that our daughters have what they need to grow and learn. But that isn't the case for nearly 13 million kids in the U.S. that struggle with hunger.
Childhood hunger is a heartbreaking reality that Feeding America is working to change. Each year, the Feeding America network of food banks rescues billions of pounds of good food that would have gone to waste and provides it to families and children in need.
You can help kids in need in your community by visiting feedingamerica.org.
Brought to you by Feeding America and the Ad Council.
Back on Destination Unlimited, my guest this week is Kathleen Marden. We're talking about the 60th anniversary edition of Captured, the Betty and Barney Hill UFO experience. Kathleen, are there differences in the latest edition?
There absolutely are differences. I did not stop investigating this case in 2007 when the first book was published. I have looked for scientists who would be willing to do a scientific investigation analysis of Betty's dress, of the star map, of many, many different things over all of those years, and all the new information is in this new second edition, 60th anniversary edition of Captured.
So tell us about your work. You have been working with MUFON and Edgar Mitchell's Foundation. What is the work that you've been doing with them?
Well, my primary interest is in the commonalities that experiencers share that set them apart from the general population. So I have worked on 3 studies. The first one was in 2012, and we reported on that in 2013. It was a small study with 75 participants. Then I worked as a consultant on the Edgar Mitchell Free Foundation's study of 3,200 experiencers. When the book was written, I helped with the questions that were asked, and then we also had PhDs who were working on that study too, doing statisticians and social scientists. And my background is in social science. I studied that more than social work, actually. And so I very much enjoy that. And we went on in 2015 to 2018. We did a MUFON Experiencer Research Team study on, we ended up with 516 participants, and we eliminated probably about 60 who did not complete all of the questions that we asked or were obvious hoaxers or wannabes. And we had methods to determine what group each of all of these individuals fit into. So I feel confident that we have some very good, solid statistics on the differences that experiencers all share, but are not common in the general population. People think of me as sort of the heart and soul of the ERT. I set up the group initially in 2011, And it has expanded as the demand grew. We now have 45 investigators who speak with experiencers on a day-to-day basis. The way that anyone who is listening can get in touch with MUFON if you would like to make a report is, and you don't have to file an investigation report. You can just speak to a non-judgmental, supportive listener who is going to be very kind and treat you well. And so all you do is to go to MUFON, MUFON.com, scroll down on the main page to Experiencer Research Team. It may say Resource Team now. Click on that. At the top of the ERT page that will come up, you will see take the Experiencer questionnaire. It's a very simple 30-question questionnaire. It's not the research study that we did. And just answer those questions. Don't think that if you only score 15 out of 30, that means that you're not an experiencer. 15 means that you are. So if you score too high, we might have questions about your motives and your truthfulness. So do not decide not to speak with a caring person because you think that they're not going to believe you. So I think that's a very important thing that I wanted to say. They're there, and they're all volunteers, but they will get back to you within a couple of days of the time that you take that experiencer questionnaire, you complete it. It will go to Dr. George Medich, and he is the assistant director of the ERT, and he runs the team on a day-to-day basis. I do not do the work that the rest of the team does anymore because I am extraordinarily busy doing other things. But so that's why we have 45 people now, because I simply could no longer do it with only a small group.
You had a wonderful friendship with your co-author, Stanton Friedman, who sadly passed away in 2019. What was it like both to work with him and be friends with him?
Well, Stanton was a wonderful person. I remember what a gentleman he was. He was just so kind and treated women extraordinarily well. He would always open the door. He would always carry what needed to be carried. And I'm a small woman, and I really appreciated that. He would always pull the chair out for me to sit down when we were working at a conference, and we would be grabbing a quick meal together between speaking engagements and work at our vendor table. He had a tremendous sense of humor. He kept me laughing, but he was wonderful to talk to because he was highly intelligent, well educated. He had a very broad spectrum of interest, as do I, and we could discuss any topic together. I really enjoyed the discussions that we had. We wrote to one another every day. We talked on the phone at least once a week. We had a real friendship that built over time, and gosh, I miss that. I really miss Stanton. Yeah. And I'm so appreciative of the work that he did with me on the 3 books that the two of us collaborated on. We worked respectfully and very considerately toward one another.
You were very fortunate to have him as both a collaborator and a friend. Watching him in interviews, I loved his sense of humor. I loved his matter-of-fact nature, and you could just tell by the personality he projected what a wonderful guy he really was.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Have reports of encounters changed in the last couple of years, and if so, how so?
I do believe that they have changed. In fact, my team has a monthly meeting, and I'm always at that monthly meeting via Zoom. And we asked the question at the last meeting, Have you been talking with people who have been taken to craft for physical examinations to have ova or semen withdrawn? Have you heard any reports of the hybrid program? And everyone on the team said that they had not. No one had heard those stories recently. So we're wondering if perhaps that program has come to an end. We know more that these entities are coming into our environment, that they can visit in our homes, that they're not necessarily seen by us because we have a limited visual range, but our pets might be able to see them. We can feel their presence through a very strong tingling sensation in our bodies. And we might receive downloads of information given telepathically. So that is a change in the way things are going. I have been concerned recently because there has been a new focus on the idea that all of this is negative. That humans are being harmed, that humans are being killed, and that all of this is demonic. And that is so far from the truth, according to our scientific studies and the statistical analyses that have been done. And also the reports that I have received in the past 30 years, and my team has received as well. Certainly, we do receive some reports that are of highly negative contact, but this is contact not by scientists. ET contact is with scientists, with educators, that sort of thing. This kind of contact, this negative type, is with interdimensionals from the astral realm who are just very negative. Maybe they had other lives where they were horrific individuals. But what they do is they attach to lower vibrating humans who might be depressed, who might abuse alcohol or drugs, who might be in pain, and they feed off that person's pain and grow larger, and eventually they might materialize in front of that individual as they gain power over that individual. That is not the same as alien abduction or ET contact. Everything is different, but it is still being confused by people who are experiencing these things. There is a way that people can have these negative entities that have attached to them removed. And that is done spiritually through religious leaders, shamans.
Absolutely. Are we close to full disclosure?
I doubt it. I seriously doubt it. I've talked to men in the military about this, and people who have retired from the military, and I presented my theory, and that is that we will not have full disclosure because people are being abducted, or so a lot of people now have an agreement for contact. But as long as this was occurring and we were militarily incapable of doing anything about it, the government could never give full disclosure. I believe that we will. Well, we know that we've had limited disclosure with the newspaper article and on the front page, headlines, in the New York Times on December 16, 2017, about the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program that ran out of the Pentagon for a number of years. The Navy has recently admitted that the 3 videos that were released of these craft on radar highly unusual, making maneuvers that a human body could not survive. All of these things are so extraordinary, and the Department of Defense has finally come out and admitted that yes, these are our videos. Mm-hmm. They're not saying what they are. They're not saying that they are extraterrestrials, but other scientists who have viewed this video have spoken out.
On behalf of experiencers around the world, now and forever, I am grateful to you, Kathleen Marden, for the work that you do.
Oh, thank you so much. This is sheer joy to me, and the most fulfilling thing that I have ever done in my life.
We're talking about the 60th anniversary edition of Captured, the Betty and Barney Hill UFO Experience, with never-before-published material in that book. Kathleen, one more time, please tell our listeners where they can get your book and find out more about you.
If you live in the United States, you can purchase my books at Kathleen-Marden.com. Autographed copies. If you don't care about the autograph, you can go to any online bookstore, Amazon, Barnes & Noble. There are many others. They have all of my books in several different formats. You can get the audio format. You can purchase the ebook, whatever you prefer. They're readily available.
Kathleen, thank you so much for joining us once again, and we look forward to having you go on again in the future.
Thank you, and I'm looking forward to speaking with you again.
And thank you for joining us on Destination Unlimited. I'm Victor, the Voice Fuhrman. Have a wonderful week.